With the Queen, we see that Scotland becomes a key part of the royal estate, and everyone knew where Elizabeth II was in summer, and that was in Balmoral.
Not for the faint of heart if you're not keen on the outdoors. There's a lot of very long walks through the heather or shooting in the heather. If you are someone whose walking boots are more decorative, this is not the place for you.
She was there when the war broke out, and that, I think, you will never forget where you were
when
World War II broke out.
And of course, in the same way that you'll never forget when you find out that Princess Diana died.
That was why the Queen wanted to stay, because she felt it was the place where the boys could be protected.
Hello and welcome to this True Royalty original programme with me, Laurence Llewelyn-Bowen. On the show, we're revealing the rich stories, past and present, of Balmoral Castle, the beloved Highland home of the royal family. Joining me in the studio to unlock the secrets and scandals of this much-loved residence are historians Professor Kate Williams and Gareth Russell. Great to have you both on the show. I mean, this place, Balmoral, it's basically their holiday home, isn't it, Kate? I mean, it's like a kind of a static caravan in Rill for them. It's somewhere they bucket and spade it.
This is the royals' holiday home, country cottage. It is not part of the royal estate. It's their private property. Balmoral, bought and then built by Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, really is this sort of Disneyland, Scottish castle, fantasy.
Look at it, ain't it just? I mean,
it is a Cinderella castle, bunged in the middle of Scotland, and it is the royal family's holiday home. It's where they go to feel relaxed, away from the cameras, away from the prying eyes, and also I've got sometimes to indulge in a bit of sort of hyper-Scottish fantasy, extra tartan.
But this is. I mean, it's a funny thing, but I suppose in a way, Gareth, we're all like that on holiday. We all have this kind of fantasy of what our holiday is going to feel like, what our behaviour is going to be like. And for them, it's this sort of strange idea that they kind of become a little bit ordinary. It's about being less royal than normal.
Yeah, it's a little bit like Marie Antoinette's village in that sense, which is that it's ordinary adjacent.
Yes.
But
ordinary light.
Yes, yeah. It's
diet ordinary.
It's ordinary without the bits you really don't like.
Yes, exactly.
But yeah, no, I mean, it's. I think for the royals, the ordinary component comes with the private component. I think where it is, and Elizabeth II and Charles III have both said you can just go walking. You can go for a nice long walk. You won't run into anyone else. So I think there is a sense of Balmoral kind of being like a world unto itself, which must be wonderful for them.
And Kate, I mean, you touched on it, but I mean, it's nothing like as old as it looks, is it? I mean, I think most people looking at that would assume, well, there you go, there is the Middle Ages in all its tourelled glory. But actually, no, this is a Victorian confection.
There's some arrow slits.
Of course there are.
Who on earth they thought they were going to be shooting with a bow and arrow in the Victorian
these
period?
days, what do you put through an arrow slit? I mean, answers on a postcard. Please. Anyone got any ideas?
Heavens knows. So Queen Victoria and Albert went to Scotland quite soon after they were married, and they were charmed by the scenery, charmed by sort of the freedom of it. And Victoria thought that it looked a lot like Albert's beloved Coburg in Germany.
Yeah.
And so they start looking around for a house, and they sort of settle on Balmoral, not too far from Ballater, and they actually buy the lease, and then they actually buy the house in 1852. But they decide that the house is too small, so they pretty much knock it down and create a whole new sort of fantasy Scottish castle. And there's a bit of a battle between these two architects who expect to get the job. There's one architect accuses the other architect of plagiarising him and says, "Can I have the job?" And they say, no, he sticks with the original. So there's an architect battle over who produces this Victorian confection. And as you say, it's a fantasy. So outside, it's all fantasy. And inside, it is tartan, it is thistles, and one visitor did say to Queen Victoria, he did say, "I feel like a donkey walking around here with all the thistles there are on the walls."
I think the thing about Queen Victoria Catholic is that she was very enthusiastic when she got enthusiastic.
Yes.
And obviously Scottishness suddenly became something that was big for her. But in a kind of a historical context, this is a bit weird because actually but a generation before, Scottishness was actually banned, wasn't it?
Yeah, so the tartan is actually, in a way, the most radical interior decorating she could have done, tartan on tartan on tartan, because in the aftermath of Bonnie Prince Charlie's rebellion in 1745, her ancestors had banned tartan. It was parliamental, I should say, but it was illegal for a long time. There was to be no demarcations of the clans. Scottish culture was stamped on because so many of them had been Jacobites. And the royal family actually really had not lived unless you're a Jacobite. But the royals had not lived in...
Let's gloss over that, shall we, my friend? You know,
Yes,
the current royal family as opposed to the old royal family.
The emeritus royals.
Yes.
So there hadn't been a royal in regular residence in Scotland since James II when he was Duke of York.
Yeah.
So it had been well over 100 years. The last time Holyrood House had been used was by the exiled French royal family after the Revolution. And actually, I think quite a lot of Scottish grandees were thrilled that, a good Catholic was back in Edinburgh. But the British royal family had not been there. There had been a very successful visit by our uncle George IV to start mending those bridges. But for the 18th
Who
yes,
wore tights
he
under
did wear
his
tights,
kilt.
which is not the traditional.
Now let's discuss pink tights under his kilt.
He had a flair, George IV. Whatever you could say about him, and I've said most of it.
Also some nasty veins, I think.
I
that
think
was the problem.
the pink takes away the purple. I
Yes,
think.
I think he did.
So yes, when she and Albert decide in the 1850s to actually start having a home in Scotland again, it's a big moment, and it seems bizarre to us because of Victoria. And then later the fact that the Queen Mother is Scottish, that there's such a Scottish influence in the royal family. That actually for over a century before Balmoral there hadn't been anything.
And it's so fascinating because this was initially a Jacobite estate.
Was it?
But so it was initially a Jacobite estate and it was confiscated after the Farquharsons were part of the Jacobite uprising. And so it was given to a part of the family who were felt not to be Jacobites. And then Albert buys it from the Farquharson descendants in the 1850s. But so Victoria's actually living in this fantasy castle on what was actually an estate in which there was possibly Jacobite plotting going on in there.
She's not really deep on all of this.
Well,
is she?
she essentially is a Jacobite because she loves her Stuart ancestors. That's her favourite thing.
Actually, doesn't she say, "Oh, I'm feeling a bit Jacobite now"?
Yeah.
She actually because
Galloping Jacobitism.
with what we have this sort of real resurgence with Balmoral of Scottish culture. That we have Walter Scott as well.
Well, of course, he's
Scotland romantic.
He's the gateway drug, isn't he?
He is the gateway drug.
He literally he's selling this vision of Scottishness that no one had dared actually peddle before because it was politically so contentious.
And you have Victoria making it very clear that one of her favourite ancestors is Mary Queen of Scots. And when the royal family are in residence at Balmoral, Victoria's eldest daughter, another Victoria, is quite a talented artist, and she passes her time painting scenes from the life of Mary Queen of Scots. They're not... she has a very fond affection for the memory of her grandfather, George III, but she's not really interested in George I or George II, except that they link her to a Stuart princess.
She loves a tragic queen, Victoria.
Yeah,
she loves Marie Antoinette. She likes a queen who
loves
dies.
Well, it was
Boleyn,
that era, wasn't it?
Yes,
let's
yeah.
all cry about something.
Well,
why be happy?
Well, there's a
when you can be
fantastic
sad?
bit in is it A Little Princess, where Sarah Crewe's being bullied, and she says, I will, she tries to give herself a little pep talk, and she says, you must behave like Marie Antoinette before the mob when the schoolgirls are bullying you.
So that's good advice.
So listen, because you mentioned the late Queen Mother, and actually that's sort of where Balmoral really, kind of clicks up a couple of gears, because Elizabeth Boleyn grew up in Scotland. She very much saw herself as Scottish, didn't she?
The Queen Mother and her family, they have a sort of an ambivalent relationship with the royal family. I believe the Queen Mother's mother said that the royals are sort of fed to the public like sea lions are fed fish. So and so they see themselves as being Scottish outsiders. But the Queen Mother, they had a house in Hertfordshire as well, but she loved her house in Scotland. It was freedom, it was rushing around, that was her home. And so you see this real Scottish influence on the royal family. And just as Gareth was saying, I mean, with Victoria, this was quite revolutionary. And also with the Queen, we see that Scotland becomes a key part of the royal estate. And everyone knew where Elizabeth II was in summer, and that was in Balmoral.
Yeah.
She was always there. And so if you wanted to see Elizabeth II in the summer, you went to Balmoral, whether you were Prime Minister or whether you were Charles and Diana on a not entirely successful honeymoon in Balmoral, because it was full of people going back and forth.
We'll get to the Balmoral test a bit later on. I think one of the interesting things is Gareth, with Balmoral, is it's outdoorsiness. It's kind of yomping through the heatherness. Everywhere else always feels very kind of courtly and constrained and very dignified. But actually, this is the one place where, right the way back to Victoria and Albert, it was all about being outside.
Yes, the outdoor is a big component to Balmoral, as it is for most of the Scottish great estates. And certainly it enabled Scottish aristocrats like the future Queen Mother to blend in quite nicely. And maybe some of the English aristocrats like Diana Spencer to struggle a little bit more because it is very, very quintessentially Scottish. And And a lot of the pastimes that the Scottish aristocracy loved, their angling, that was a big thing.
Should we go for killing?
Should we go
killing?
or killing?
Killing something else.
There was a brilliant story about the borders of the Balmoral estate, and the Queen Mother, in her widowhood, became quite a keen, apparently very good fisherwoman, and she was sort of all kitted up in head to toe in olive green, but she looked over, and a lady from the other estate was there too, and they were sort of fishing. And the other lady looked over and sort of awfully familiar, and then realised it was the Queen Mother. And this woman was of good royalist stock, and Cascading River be damned, she was going to curtsy. So she curtsied, and her boots immediately filled with water. And the Queen Mother said, for a minute, I thought this was going to be death by curtsy.
Exactly. One and only go. But because with Victoria, I mean, Victoria had such an immense sense of the romance of being at Balmoral, probably a heightened sense of romance, but that was greater than any of the other residents. And of course, when Albert dies, Balmoral becomes absolutely essential to her as somewhere that she can really, still be in touch with Albert.
Yes, Laurence, Victoria was such a romantic, and she, like so many Victorians, they were obsessed to the romantic age. They wanted to go on the train to somewhere that was beautiful and savage and remote, but not too savage and remote. They still wanted some creature comforts, and she loved the long walks, and she loved the bagpipes. And under her window, there was always a bagpiper every morning, which drove some of the ladies in waiting slightly crazy. And then when Albert dies, comes to Victoria, it seems to be the only place that she can be happy. And that is because the land reminds her of Albert, the Coburg lands, the fact that they had this freedom. She said, when I get to Balmoral, I feel this sense of relief, sense of freedom that's why people buy holiday homes, isn't it?
But she had this sort of almost psychotic kind of displeasure at the idea of work at this point, because she very much felt that Albert had worked himself to death, and that if he'd not been, forced by the government to work so hard, he'd still be alive. So she deliberately kind of, drops everything, doesn't she? She wants to get as far away from her responsibilities and the day job as possible. And Balmoral's a great place to do that.
Victoria, I think she has a difficult line to walk, because women of that class, when your husband dies, you're supposed to retire from public view for a long period of time. Victoria can't do that because she's expected to being seen. She's sort of a victim of her own success in one way, that everyone expects to see the Queen. She was out there being seen even when they were shooting at her. So she has to, when she doesn't, people say, what is the Queen doing? So even though she's looking at her boxes and going through her sort of constitutional duties, she's not being Queen because she's not there. And so this is the complicated question. And of course, she has this freedom in Balmoral to but sort of, express her grief, whereas she can't do that in London. And she has John Brown. There we go.
John Brown, absolutely. Let's go down the John Brown road, shall we? Because, Gareth, John Brown is a ghillie, so he's an outdoor servant, quite rough and ready. Fine pair of calves, by all accounts.
Better than George IV.
Better than George IV, because I didn't need the pink tights. But ever since, he's not the only name that gets linked to Victoria in her widowhood, it has to be said. She does seem to develop these passionate, how passionate we'll never know, but certainly there's an immense amount of sentiment attached to this relationship.
I mean, it's as you say, even with Balmoral and the tartan and everything, when Victoria feels anything, it tends to be very strong.
Well, she invests incredibly heavily in that emotion, whatever that emotion is, and we know that from the diaries, whether that's joy, whether that's grief, whether that's hunger. She goes crazy for it.
I think with absolutely, she very much does. With John Brown, it's interesting because he is very much off Balmoral. He was working there when they bought it as a young man. He was well thought of by Victoria's late husband, Albert. And this friendship develops partly because he is sort of quite down to earth, and he'll tell her, he'll give her quite clear, honest advice, which I think she really values, partly because grief is many, many things to different people, but it does have the capacity, even in a large family, to isolate you. And John Brown, in a way, benefits from the fact that Victoria feels almost on the other side of a river from people in her family. She's separated by this loss of Albert. And he is tolerated by some of her children, actively disliked by others. But he is very, very important to her. And there's been this debate for years, of which I think there are really three options.
What's your option?
Well,
didn't they?
Well, my option is
Snog, marry, avoid.
Yeah, actually, yeah, that is what it is. So the first option is that they were, as it's depicted in the very successful movie where Judi Dench and Billy Connolly play them, which is brilliant, that it was platonic and a very, very loyal friendship. The second option is that they were lovers, and the third is that they were secretly married. And if I had to rank my theories, I personally would discount the theory that they were lovers. I think it was either a platonic friendship, choice one, or I could be persuaded at a real push that they secretly married, because Victoria had a very, very high sex drive. You can see that in the diaries.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, this is, it always sounds a bit weird, like we're kind of just being a bit sort of gossipy.
Yeah.
But we know from her own writings that she was incredibly sexually...
Well, it's that Hanoverian Anne Stewart blood.
It comes together,
It is the emotion as well, because she adores Albert. I mean,
but where are you with this? Are you snog, marry or avoid?
I think Victoria was so emotionally dependent on him, and she was someone, I mean, not unlike Marie Antoinette, who had these diffusive, dependent friendships. I think sometimes being friends with Victoria was too much. She would be texting you all day long.
Yeah. Should text be around in the Victorian period? Yeah, of course.
But so Victoria is very intense about everything, from castles to people. So she has this intense obsession with John Brown, and not obsession, maybe obsession is going too far, but they're fascinated by each other. They're devoted friends. To me, I think he symbolises the life that's gone. It's Balmoral as a family. It's Albert, that he knew Albert so intimately.
But also, I think she always had a big thing about male authority figures as well. She was always looking for kind of father figures all the way through the prime ministers.
And she, Mrs. Brown was used as an insult, but so she was called Mrs. Disraeli, Mrs. Melbourne, because they felt she was too dependent on them. And I find it fascinating that Victoria felt her childhood was ruined and devastated by her mother being so dependent on her former husband's equerry, and now here's Victoria being sort of emotionally dependent on her former husband's equerry.
But I know exactly. What we do know, though, is that she was buried with a photograph, with a picture of John Brown, and she had his mother's wedding ring on her hand.
That's a good piece of evidence for the marriage theory.
It is, isn't it?
But it also kind of torpedoes that they were lovers theory, because it seems unlikely that Edward VII or the other children would have allowed that to happen if they had suspected it was a romantic affair. So I think...
Yes, because he didn't do that much, did he, Edward VII? He moved Brown's statue round the corner, but he didn't totally destroy it in Balmoral.
I think I would tend to agree with Kate on this. I think that probably it was a very, very intense friendship. The reason why I would make marriage the second option is that, on the one hand, yes, there is, I think, a great, very, very strong feelings. There's also a very, very strong low church Christian faith. And I think had she been going to do it, I think there probably would have been a ring involved somehow. But my instinct is monarchy came first, and he was a very good friend. That's my gut. But
he also committed the ultimate solecism of dying as well, just like her husband had.
So selfish.
So selfish, and left her in a real tiz. But I mean, already, and this place has only been built for, sort of a decade or so. Already there's a lot going on there. There's a lot of stories attached to it.
And you couldn't do this in London. She couldn't really do this in the Isle of Wight. So this is somewhere where she could, friendship or whatever it was, have this friendship with John Brown.
And I love what you're both saying as well about this sort of, this very kind of like stoked romanticism that comes with this place. The fact that it's so contrived to feel romantic, and she's got a head full of stuff about Marie Antoinette, and also about Mary Queen of Scots, and Jacobite rebellions and all that kind of thing. So it's funny when we move into the 20th century that actually it becomes quite dull. It becomes a bit suburban in a way. There's something quite kind of bourgeois about the way the Windsors...
It's so true. They have this very strict routine, don't they? A very strict routine at Balmoral. The vicar comes at this point, someone comes at that point. Then here's your outdoor walk. Yeah. And it's a very strict, organised routine.
Well, it's the interesting combination of George V's obsession with timetable and everything. And also then you have, quite uselessly for fans of royal gossip, you have George VI and Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, who have a really happy marriage and quite a small nuclear family.
Darn it.
Yeah,
no goss.
No one's... I mean, there's nothing really particularly scandalous
I mean, what
happening.
she brings to this, which is very interesting, is a very kind of non-royal experience of Scotland.
Yes.
So for her, as we've already discussed, she's all about that idyllic Scottish childhood, which is about, gamboling in the heather and, cookouts, barbecues, whatever. So instantly that's all brought straight into the family experience.
She changes,
and very heady for, future Queen Elizabeth II.
It's essentially a Scottish childhood in many ways for her. Margaret's the first royal to be born in Scotland since 1602. And I think it's also quite interesting that Balmoral essentially becomes like Glamis in many ways, like the Queen Mother's childhood home. It played a role in how they got together because Bertie, the future George VI, he could go from Balmoral to Glamis. And he writes these quite moving letters where he says, in Elizabeth's family with the Bowes-Lyons, they're all sitting around the piano singing songs and, there's practical jokes at night. They sort of, do the apple.
Who does that sound like? Does that not sound a bit like our current Prince of Wales?
Yeah.
Does that not sound exactly like William's reaction to the Middletons? That, they have this lovely family, easygoing life.
And Prince Philip thinking about Elizabeth's own family. That was one of the attractions. There's this close family who seemed to actually like each other and like his.
Well, that's exactly. And I think the fact that, the future George VI comes back to Balmoral and he says, and now everything's back on the timetable. But a real testament to how liked the future Queen Mother was when she married into the royal family, to the point that George V's adult children were sort of mouth open in shock. They had all been screamed at and punished for tardiness their whole life. They had to be obsessively punctual. Elizabeth thought a watch was more of a guide.
Yes.
And she sort of sailed down to dinner about 10 minutes later. I'm so sorry. And all the adult children are braced for George V.
Grinding their teeth.
And he finds the future Queen Mother so charming. He says, "No, my dear, we sat down too early."
Yes.
And the children are just quietly outraged that this has happened.
I think this is the thing, and this is the story that seems to be building, is that this is a very genuine place. For all its flummery, for all its fakery, actually, the affection, the emotion is a very, very, intense vibe in Balmoral, and this is what they're all obsessed about returning to.
I think the Queen loved it as a child. She was there when the war broke out, and that I think you will never forget where you were when World War II broke out. She always sees,
and of course, in the same way that you'll never forget when you find out that Princess Diana died, and she was at Balmoral as well.
She was at Balmoral as well, and that. We remember those times. That was the principle. That was why the Queen wanted to stay, because she felt it was the place where the boys could be protected, and yet there was such an outcry of criticism.
The public hated it, but actually, it's interesting these days because I think most people are now understanding that much more and saying she made the right decision.
Also, it's so funny. It's not like she was in another country. No. She was in the United Kingdom.
Exactly.
She was in her country.
She wasn't in Butlins.
No, she was actually she was in her castle in Scotland.
But having said she wasn't in Butlins, she kind of was. Even though it's so well documented with all the memoirs that have come back, the visiting prime ministers, the visiting celebrities, everybody's got an opinion. We now got a very clear idea of what a couple of days at Balmoral were like under Queen Elizabeth II. Paint us a picture.
Well, it's not for the faint of heart if you're not keen on the outdoors. There's a lot of very long walks through the heather or shooting in the heather. Yeah. If you're prone to being bitten by midges, if you are someone whose walking boots are more decorative, this is not the place for you. And it's not an opt-in kind of place. So breakfast is usually served downstairs. Obviously, they stuck for a long time to the old rule that married women could have theirs in the tray upstairs. Depending on the season, but that's a lie. The season is largely you just if it's cold and wet and out you go.
Whatever you do.
Yeah, there's lovely stories of I'll not swear, but I'll blank out the word the Gilly said, but the Queen was very, very careful if they would go out and they maybe bring a picnic or something or a barbecue and they go to one of the boathies in the grounds. But you have to little sort of cottages for people outside the UK. Sheds.
We call it a shed.
It's a shed. There's nothing in it. But it's shelter point and where you have the picnic. And the Queen was usually very good at bringing the key to them, but she forgot. And so and then this downpour happens, and you have this beleaguered royal party of royals and aristocrats.
The soggy picnic.
Knocking on the door with a soggy picnic, and from the other side of the door, there's a gilly inside for it, and he shouts back, "Who the F is it?" And then the Queen Mother's voice trills over the crowd, saying, "Don't worry, it's only the Queen." At which point the door flings open. But there's the outdoors, and then if the weather is a bit better, you can do the angling, and then there'll be dinner, possibly dancing or a reel.
But let's talk about the barbecues, Kate, because I mean, barbecues are famous, aren't they? I mean, you know, the late Duke of Edinburgh apparently had his didn't he have his Land Rover reconfigured to he designed his own barbecue accoutrement carrier for his.
Our tech lover, the Duke of Edinburgh, did redesign his car.
Very tomorrow's world.
Very tomorrow's world. He redesigned his car because he was an avid barbecuer, and he used to do the barbecuing. So whenever you went to Balmoral, lots of Scottish friends went, London friends went, and of course the Prime Minister goes.
Yeah.
So you all go to Balmoral, and you all have this outdoor barbecue, which is very informal, but probably maybe a bit midgy, as Gareth was suggesting. Very informal, and the Duke of Edinburgh busily makes the sausages and hands them out. And then the Queen, Elizabeth, would collect together the plates and trundle off to do the washing up. And so this actually became, there was a marvellous story that when Mrs Thatcher was there, now Mrs Thatcher and Balmoral were sort of chalk and cheese.
Not a great fit.
The Queen said...
She didn't have the footwear for it.
Well,
really,
exactly.
Did she? No.
The Queen said, I think Mrs Thatcher only walks on the road.
Yeah.
And when Mrs Thatcher was at this barbecue with Dennis, the Queen started collecting together the plates. And Mrs Thatcher said, no, I'll do it. I'll do the washing up. So there was a battle between the Queen and Mrs Thatcher on who did the washing up.
Between the Queen and the Prime Minister of who could be the most ordinary.
Who could do the washing up. And, you know, two ladies battling over the washing up, it can get tough. And the Queen won. But then Mrs Thatcher wanted to have the last word because for Christmas, she sent the Queen a pair of yellow washing up gloves.
There we are. But of course, this has now been disputed slightly. I can't remember what one of the ladies in waiting said that. Yes, the Queen would kind of rinse them a bit, but actually they all went back to the kitchens to be properly washed. I don't think the Queen was very good at it.
It might have been just more enthusiasm rather than. Although Theresa May told a great story of how the Queen really judged everyone, was trying to get the measure of the Prime Ministers during the Balmoral weekend, and. She didn't like waste, you know, she liked to keep everything in the Tupperware. And Theresa May, I think it was a cheese or a biscuit, something, she dropped something during one of these picnics, and she sort of, it's a 5-second rule, got down, dusted it off and put it back on. And she turned around, and there was the Queen, and the Queen nodded as if to say, well done.
Well done.
Yes. 5-second
I would have
rule.
done that.
Quite right, Theresa.
I was timing it. But I mean, you say about tests, because I think this is. Let's get on to the whole Balmoral test thing, because this is something that latterly, particularly the royal family under Elizabeth II, actually kind of initiated this idea that if you want to get the measure of someone who you are going to be working very closely with, like a Prime Minister, or indeed a new boyfriend, girlfriend, fling them into the kind of the atmosphere of Balmoral and see if they sink or swim.
Sink or swim. And this is very much what happened to Diana in the early days of the courtship. So one of the earliest few dates that Diana has with Charles, she goes up to Balmoral. Now her sister's there, with her husband, but there's a huge group of people, and Diana's very young, and she does find it very difficult because it is very outdoorsy. There's this schedule of different people dressing here, lots of people talking all the time.
Because she was quite London at that stage. Well, she'd always been very London.
She's very London. I mean, she's very young,
very Sloane Ranger,
very young, and everything about it, and also that's when she. Generally, I mean, that's essentially when Diana gets spotted. This is the other thing about Balmoral. It is quite hard to go there incognito. Yeah. So Diana gets spotted at the airport, and after that, everyone knows about Diana. So she's spotted there. So there is this Balmoral test that Diana herself found particularly difficult, and
yet she passed.
They thought she was marvellous.
Yeah, they all thought she was wonderful.
They thought she was marvellous, and I think I'm sure they all thought it would be a great treat for her to go there on her honeymoon.
I think it was, and again, I think that's a moment of great illumination for her character. I think the difference between how she was really perceived fell a lot further forward than she ever really gave herself credit for.
I think so. You see
There's a lot of low self-esteem going on there.
There is, and what you see later when she's speaking to Andrew Morton or when she's talking in the Panorama interview is that there is a sense that Diana almost can't believe that her performances were convincing.
Yeah.
So she feels that this was a horrible weekend for her. As you say, she feels like, why on earth would they have thought I wanted Balmoral? And what she's failed to realise is that she was so successful at sort of best foot forward at Balmoral that everyone believed it had been very easy for her. I think Diana underestimated how brilliant she was in
the effect she was having.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't mention Balmoral and Best Foot Forward without actually talking about toe sucking. because so
that is a...
see what I've done there?
That was a segue for the ages.
Yeah, I know. I want that one recognised. I want that one mentioned in dispatches, because it was at Balmoral that Fergie, with her children, she was separated from Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, but nonetheless, suddenly the tabloid newspapers were full of photographs of her having her toe sucked. Jury's still slightly out on that one, by her financial advisor. And she had to face the royals at breakfast. I mean, how on earth would that have gone down, Kate?
Yes, Laurence. So the children loved Balmoral. The cousins, William, Harry, Beatrice, Eugenie, Zara and Peter, they all loved to go to Balmoral and have a good play together during the summer holidays. And the parents would facilitate that.
Sort of swallows and Amazons.
They adored it. And that's, of course, why William and Harry were there when Diana passed away. Yeah. And so they take the children up. So Fergie takes the children up, even though she's separated, because they have a whale of a time with their cousins. Yeah. And then the Queen likes to get every newspaper delivered at breakfast. She likes to read them all, from the highbrow to the lowbrow, and that's what you see on Sunday morning. Non-stop pictures of Fergie and John Bryan, and she has to face them, as you say, at breakfast. And my guess was that it was very stiff. Yeah. Nothing was said, but there was a cold atmosphere that you could cut with a knife, because Sarah knows.
Do you not think that? I mean, Duke of Edinburgh, he must have let out a rant, because he famously really, decided that she was
not. She was back.
Yeah, absolutely. She was.
I mean, this is just my speculation. I think he would have simmered angrily and saved it up, but maybe not. But still, what a place to see yourself
right in the heart.
In Balmoral, you can't escape. You can't say, just popping off to John Lewis.
But also, I mean, in many ways, it's the ultimate solecism, isn't it, Gareth? Because what she's doing there is she's bringing the outside world, the work world, into this sanctuary. That's the last thing that they would ever want.
Yeah, and they start to change what newspapers are brought up. So whilst the Queen likes to read them all, the Queen Mother and Princess Margaret cannot face another shock like this in the morning. So it strangely, the two papers of choice when the Queen Mother and Princess Margaret go to Balmoral after Towgate is the Daily Telegraph, which is more highbrow and right-leaning, and also the Independent. And because it's a Republican newspaper, it never mentions the royal family. There we go. So actually, it was safer for them to pick it up.
You missed out Racing Post. Racing Post will be there as well.
Yes, of course. It'll be a bit of Country Life as well, I think.
Bit of Country Life as well. But one of its great kind of icon moments, I think, as a royal residence, is the fact that actually Elizabeth II dies at Balmoral. And this is just, I think people still underplay the significance and importance of that. Because, Kate, we now know that Operation London Bridge, which was the code name for Queen Elizabeth II's funeral arrangements, and obviously everything is very, very complicated and very, very difficult. Actually, a death at Balmoral was considered to be the absolute worst case scenario, wasn't it?
It was. There were plans made for death in every possible royal residence, also abroad on a royal visit,
and crossing the road.
All the different possibilities, and Balmoral was seen as a very complicated scenario, because it was the question of the travel. Yeah. How would the Queen then travel down to London? How would that be done? Because if there was some talk of doing it by train, but the train they felt would be, they were concerned people would rush onto the tracks and
they were concerned about attacks. I don't know what you think. I think looking back on it, they made a mistake and they should have done the train, because I can understand the concern, but I wondered the queue to see the body in the lying in state was so long, because there had been no other point, and whereas had people been able to line the track, it might have taken some of the pressure off as well.
Because I remember covering it, and I remember watching the plane go off, and I found it very emotional watching the plane.
Because the thing is as well is that we now know, I mean, we don't, we can't say for sure, but we can surmise that this was a deliberate decision. The Queen knew she was dying. Yes. There's also a suggestion that actually Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, was very much there as well.
Yes.
Everyone knew it was likely to happen in Balmoral. So what kind of change do you think, Gareth? Why did she
go there?
Why did she go there? Why did she go there to die,
according to an interview with Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, Elizabeth II was considering staying in London or maybe Windsor or somewhere, because she didn't want to cause a fuss. She knew that the Operation Unicorn, the plan to move the body from Balmoral, would be more difficult for people and more faff and fuss. And it was Princess Anne who said, I don't think that should be a factor in where you make this decision. Where do you want to go? And I don't think there was any doubt that it was Balmoral. And there was something really quite beautiful about the echoes of this Scottish childhood. I mean, not long before Elizabeth II passed away, I'd been working on a book about her mother. And so the reason why the names were in my mind. And when I was looking at all the aristocrats or the figures from Scottish society who were being tasked with helping certain stages from Balmoral to Edinburgh, they were all people who had known the Queen Mother's family, who had grown up with her at Glamis and had gone to Balmoral.
So actually this is a very personal thing.
Yeah, very much
more,
so.
Not just a constitutional Queenie thing. This is actually about her. And again, it shows how incredibly emotional Balmoral is. At the very heart of the royal family. Of course, the big thing is that dying in Scotland meant that she then travelled the length of her country to get to London, and she would not have done if she'd died at Windsor.
I thought the lying in state at St Giles in Edinburgh was one of the most beautiful things I've seen, and it did. With myself coming from a part of the UK that's not England, I find it really...
So we love, we're Welsh.
Yeah, of course. We're all from the outskirts.
We're all outside.
We're all right.
We're all the outskirts.
Oh yeah, of course we are. That's
I
quite
know,
that's
right?
quite rare.
I know.
I find it really beautiful when the honours of Scotland were brought in as well, and it was a reminder just of all the extraordinary history that is embodied in these moments and the personal.
Yeah. And I think also for the Queen, a consideration was that the sort of summer that she had for Balmoral, number one, the Queen was a person of routine. She spent her summers in Balmoral. She always did. She was going to continue doing so. And we understand from the reports that she had a really lovely summer, even though her health was deteriorating. People would come to visit, the vicar came to visit. So I think the fact that she could entertain in a low-key way.
Liz Truss, the Prime Minister, for a couple of days came to visit.
Exactly. So that was the thing, I think. She could do what she liked to do, entertain, be
So
social,
it felt very
without
her.
the pressure of it being
Very,
at Buckingham
very her.
Palace. And I think that these rooms that she'd loved as a child, these rooms that she remembered from the war, and these rooms that had so many memories for her. She never really loved Buckingham Palace. These rooms had so many memories for her. Was the place that she passed away, and I think that was so meaningful.
And I think Scotland and Balmoral, in a way, they do have a presence in royal deaths. I mean, even some of the royals, like Princess Margaret, the Queen Mother, who died in England. I know that the prayers they asked to be read to them at the end were Highland prayers. There is a palpable sense that,
and there's always a piper as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Scotland and all parts of it, Lowlands and Highlands, there is such a spiritual connection, and I think it matters very profoundly to them.
I think it's rather sad, isn't it? Because I'm not sure anyone is ever going to love Balmoral as much as Victorian Elizabeth.
No, I think
did.
you're absolutely right. And let's move forward to now, because we know that King Charles, there's a lot of refurbishment going on there. He's opened it up for the first time ever. You can now visit Balmoral Castle.
And he loved it when he was young. He wrote The Old Man of Lochnagar, which he gave gave the story to little brothers, and then wrote the story. So he loved it then and loved the fishing. But I think now, increasingly, he prefers to be in Highgrove.
But also the other thing is, of course, I mean, he still very much has his presence on the Balmoral estate. He now has Birkhall House with Queen Camilla, which is a prettier thing, really, isn't it? It's sort of smaller, Georgian, much more him. So it's not the fact that he's turning his back on Scotland, but he is potentially seeing this very iconic structure as being something that is more facing the nation rather than just the royal family.
Well, because it's become so famous as this royal piece of history, so I can understand that, and he does. He loves the estate, and as you say, at Birkhall is primarily where he lives now. When he goes there with Queen Camilla, quite touchingly, it was his grandmother, the Queen Mother's residence in widowhood when she went to Balmoral, and Charles adored her. I mean, his address to the nation when she died was quite moving, but apparently he has left her coat and Wellington boots still at the door in the hangar, as if she was going out for a walk one last time. So he has all these incredible memories. But what's interesting for historians of monarchy and how Balmoral plays into that is that we are looking at a potentially post-Scottish monarchy, because he is the son of an English aristocrat, and a very English aristocrat. And William did not have as many links, neither did Harry or any of that generation of the royal family, to Scotland in the way Elizabeth and Margaret did. And Charles and his siblings spent a lot of time with their grandmother up in Scotland as well. So what we're going to see in the next 10, 15 years is what is the role that Balmoral will play.
I think for William, it does have that association, and for Harry, that was where they learned about their mother's death. And they just can't love it again the way that they did as children. We don't see William and Kate just popping up there for a week or so. I think that, or introducing their children to it in the same way.
For them.
I think they aren't going to, their children aren't going to have that same sort of Scottish kind of childhood for the reasons why, yes, I think it is now. It was a place of freedom for Victoria, a place of freedom for Elizabeth II in a different way. But for William, it has these bad memories.
And I think politically or constitutionally, there is a potential knock-on effect of that.
Yeah.
The withdrawal of the royal family from Scotland, except possibly for Holyrood Week, I think would be an enormous mistake. And I should say, there's no indicator at all that the future William V is planning this.
No.
At all.
But it's an interesting thought because, we've and actually when you look at it historically, that association with the ruling family has actually only been 200 years anyway. So, we're talking about kind of cycles here.
Yes.
But it's fascinating. And I think this place, because it is their holiday cottage, because it is absolutely somewhere where they kind of always felt that they could be the real them, for the last 200 years has been the background to so much big stuff, but also so much small stuff, and that's what makes it so incredibly powerful. So much personal stuff.
Princess Vicky, Victoria's daughter, was proposed to there, and then became the mother of Kaiser Wilhelm. And of course, Victoria loved Scotland so much that she wrote her own book, which was one big romanticised vision of Scotland, coincided with the spread of the railways. So Scottish tourism really took off in the 19th century and has never stopped. People all over the world, lots of people all over the world, when you say, where would you like to go to in the UK? They'll say London and Scotland. And that's where I want to go.
And it's interesting that, Victoria's love of it and the family connections that she has. Her favourite granddaughter, Alexandra, who marries the Tsar, comes there in 1896. And Tsar Nicholas II says, of all the homes owned by the British royal family, this is the one that he thinks is head and shoulders above the rest. He absolutely loves it. There's quite a magnificent photograph of Victoria surrounded by Nicholas and Alexandra with their first child, baby Olga, on her knee. And it's a contest between the baby and Queen Victoria to see who can sort of glower more intensely.
Look more chubby and grumpy.
At the camera.
Like that about Queen Victoria. And of course she ends up building cairns in the garden, doesn't she, Queen Victoria?
Yeah.
Anything that happens, any kind of momentous moment, suddenly she'll build a pyramid, a Balmoral pyramid in the garden.
And there's one to Albert with the Great Pyramid of Scotland, sort of say, again, I'm so sorry you're dead. But there is a little bit like in the previous generations, the follies that they build in aristocratic estates. The Victorians are so interesting in this kind of intense veneration of the past, but also being quite prepared to tinker at it.
To abuse it.
They would look at the past and go, yeah, it's all right, but actually I want a few more turrets.
I'm going to improve it.
Over-turret it. Well, listen, thank you so much for that, you two, because I know that you chose to be here rather than be in Balmoral for the summer holidays, because I'm sure you're both invited.
I'm a bagpiper, yes.
I can tell. But absolutely fascinating. An incredible piece of royal history. Intimate and actually really very, very powerful at the same time. That's all we've got time for on this show. Thank you so much to my guests, Professor Kate Williams and Gareth Russell, and to you for tuning in. Do keep the conversation going on our socials. Just search True Royalty TV. See you next time.